Hello, everybody, and welcome to some teaching, some information, some musings about the winter solstice. This feels like a powerful time. I think we're all in that right now. And this time of year, particularly, feels very, very deep normally anyway. So 2020 is a particularly potent time at the winter solstice. So my name's Lucy Morus-Baird. I live in Wales, in Cymru, in the UK. So please, if you're watching, introduce yourself, say where you are in the world. It's really interesting to see if people are watching from different places and to really feel into that and feel into each other so that we can feel our community, I suppose. Hi Rob, just seen that you've posted there. Nice to see you. So the first thing I'd like to say really is that especially in Wales, the solstices and equinoxes are not necessarily the most important festivals. Not that they weren't or aren't important, but Calan Mai and Calan Gaeaf, according to historic documentation, are the most important festivals in Wales, and that is the festivals of Samhain and Baltana. So those festivals being at the opposite ends of the year, the fire festivals, were the most important. And these other festivals were celebrated, but on obviously the time of midwinter had many traditions. So I'm going to talk a little about some of the midwinter traditions here in Wales that might not have necessarily been on the actual day of the solstice, but would have been around this time and sometimes would have extended throughout all of winter. And that actually was important for this time of year. And also, I'm going to talk about some of the actual solstice traditions that we find ourselves in. And also, I want to be clear that this potent moment was probably absorbed into the Christian tradition with the birth of Christ. So there aren't any actual myths in the form of an archetypal figure from that old Celtic era. But there could well have been stories that were absorbed into Christianity. And I suppose this is how myth and culture evolve. The myths have amalgamated with the Christian traditions that we've seen with some of the other festivals, like Calan Gaeaf, like Samhain as well, like turning into Halloween. So obviously I'm talking about winter solstice. I know some people call it Yule. That's Germanic in origin. So I'm not really coming at this from any kind of dogma of this is right and this is wrong. I'm really into finding our own way to connect to this festival because it is so powerful and unique to everybody. I mean, I'm not pretending that in the UK we've been handed an unbroken lineage, a bundle from through the ages, because we haven't. We've got fragments and stories and these kind of residues of old traditions and historic documents, and often our sacred places hold this knowledge, but so we have to somehow find our own way, which I feel comfortable with. But it often means that there are many, many different stories and many ways of celebrating. And obviously we can see this throughout the world as well. So just to say, if any of you have just joined us, my name's Lucy Morus-Baird and I'm talking about the winter solstice. So yeah, and also I just want to state I'm not really I wouldn't call myself an expert on this. I'm just a human who is following these sun festivals and is really noticing how it changes my behavior, how it deepens my connection, how it really truly enhances my life, like that I can reflect what's going on outside my world and reflect it into my inner world. So in that way, acknowledging that the our ancestors would have really simply celebrated growing food, harvesting food, storing food, planting food. You know, their lives were so much about food, and obviously the sun plays a huge part in that. So really like celebrating the sun at these different points in the year, and that being a really big part of life back then, and obviously life for many people now, as we acknowledge the need for humans to really eat food and be well in that way. So it's a great way to remember where we've come from, but also really tune into the land, and the turning of the year. So yeah, I suppose one of the things I want to do is just to take a moment right now, and acknowledge the depth of the darkness that we're in. I was really aware that of how quickly it became dark. You know, I was looking out the window at about 3:30, and I could see that it was starting to get dark. And this time of year obviously is when it is the most dark, and I suppose what that means for people in general, you know, and I'm obviously talking about the Northern Hemisphere here, but you know, when there's not a lot of light in the day, then we do spend a lot of time indoors, and that is just a reality. So we are inside around our fires, telling stories, just sorting things out, really, clearing things out, making sure we have enough seeds, checking our stores for the coming year, making sure that there's no mice in our pantries, all of that kind of stuff, so that we can, it's not like this time of year there's not much activity, but it does feel more dreamy and like a different kind of vibration. And that's something to really acknowledge. And also, you know, we are calling back the light, and that is the moment of the solstice, is to feel that full darkness and take an in breath in that depth of real darkness, and then call back the light, to really like acknowledge that the descent of the sun has stopped, and it will start rising again, higher and higher, and what that means for the land and for the people, the warmth that comes, the light, and the possibility of growing food. So I'm going to talk about some of these traditions, specifically in Wales, really, as partly because that's where I live, and I really feel rooted there, and I feel rooted in the traditions there. Being married to a Welsh man, Welsh speaking man, who's really rooted in his culture, and who shares, and who is very well researched in all of this stuff, particularly historically. So um, one of the one of the traditions that I'm going to talk about is the Mary Lloyd, which is not necessarily a solstice tradition, but it's a midwinter tradition. So it is it happens throughout winter, really, and it begins, you know, around now and goes well into kind of January, and it has had a real revival in rural Wales in the last 30 years, but it did actually die off up until quite recently. But so if you can imagine a man with a sheet covering, a white sheet covering his body, and a horse's skull poking out of the top, and the sheet is covered in ribbons and decorations, and as is the skull. And so the Mary Lloyd, which is this like figure, and a bunch of men, some of which are dressed quite smart, and some of them are dressed up as a kind of Punch and Judy characters, knock on doors around the village and sing sequences of verses. And the people inside the houses lock the doors and lock the windows, and they deny the Mary Lloyd entry. And the challenge is for the people to respond to the verses. So the men and the Mary Lloyd outside the house will like sing the verses, and the people inside will like sing back. And eventually the challenge is like that the people inside won't be able to sing anymore, and they have to let the Mary Lloyd in. And inside, the Mary Lloyd would chase the women around and chase the children around and cause havoc and perform this kind of chaotic dance. And the singers would be like given beer, and kind of it was like this raucous drunken celebration. But I suppose this is quite a symbolic thing. So they're people inside the house are like symbolically feeding this like horse's skull, this dead thing, this like evoking renewal. And the wives and the lovers of the men who go round with the Mary Lloyd would be the ones who would decorate the Mary Lloyd. So it has this feeling of this. And the Mary Lloyd went inside the house with these Punch and Judy characters who are dressed up as kind of women with rolling pins, would go and they would like sweep the hearth inside the houses. So they would be clearing out, ready for new. So there's this renewal. Some people say it looks like a fertility rite. It's the acknowledgement of winter, like being the kind of death time, and then clearing out, preparing for the spring. And it feels very rooted in the feminine, in the women, and casting out the bad spirits from the house. And these days, it's likely to have died out in the middle of the 20th century, but it has had this revival, and you can see it in different parts of Wales now, in rural Wales, where you can find pubs. There's one near where we live in Dinas Mawddwy where they do this celebration, and they're up all night drinking and playing music, and it's gorgeous. So yeah, if you have just joined us watching live, then my name is Lucy Morus-Baird, and I'm just sharing some of the traditions of Winter Solstice. So if any of you are watching, please write your name, where you are. Oh, lovely to see Miguel in Guatemala. Hey, Miguel, and Annette from Stockholm. Thank you for joining. So one of the other really beautiful traditions that I've been finding out about, and this is something about this has this really beautiful frequency for me that I really, really love. And I don't know whether it's something about the relationship with water, but there is a kind of similar tradition. So the Mary Lloyd is very rooted in with the women and the children. The Mary Lloyd goes inside the house and chases the children around. And there's this other really beautiful tradition involving children, which involves well water. And it's the blessing from the wells, which is called Hyfan y Ffynnon, which basically means the cream of the well. And this is could easily have been a solstice tradition. And like many other folk traditions, it's really difficult to know how old it is, but the last kind of recordings of this was like between the wars, where the children would go out generally in the first days of January, but this could well have been a solstice tradition, in that acknowledgement of time, that time being kind of like over that period, and to collect this energetically potent water that rises to the top of the well during this really potent and auspicious time over solstice. So the children, some villages it was the boys, some villages it was the girls, some villages it was just the children, would go and collect this water in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. and they would take it round the village, and they would use sprigs of evergreen trees or sometimes rosemary, and they would go inside people's homes when they were sleeping and spray this potent cream well water, the cream of the well water, the best well water, heaven of funnel. They would spray it, sprinkle it around people's houses. Um, and it was a way, again, of like this renewal for the coming year, to kind of bless from that beautiful, like deep earth water. Something about this I absolutely love. I really want to want to bring back this tradition. There's something really beautiful about it. So yeah, and it feels like I looked at some pictures earlier on from, like, I think it was like the 20s, of these children still 1920s still doing this tradition in rural Wales. So it wasn't that long ago, you know, I suppose 100 years ago, when like villages were still doing this. And obviously, like with the it's just difficult to know how old it is, but it feels very, very old. So yeah, maybe we can if any of you have got like access to wells, I don't know, please write it in the chat if you can, if this somehow chimes with you, that you can like in some way do something like this over the solstice. So the next thing I want to talk about is this. It's really like something about this pre-Celtic monuments. So there is this really beautiful place in Ireland called Brú le Bonnet, which some of you might know as New Grange, the Palace of Bonnet. And this is an enormous pre-Celtic passage grave, and it was built around 5,000 years ago. And the winter solstice sunrise sun penetrates deep inside the chamber, along this quite long passageway deep into the tomb. And they say this is like the dwelling place of gods, I mean, you know, 5,000 years ago, building something to align with the sun feels like quite an incredible thing to do, really. So I suppose it has this really beautiful and interesting frequency. And if you look at pictures of it, you can see it. It has this front, which is like, it was built with 2,000 tons of river stone, which people would have like lugged for over a kilometre, and then it has these huge big river stones in there as well. So it's really, really impressive when you see it. And then it was so there was something about that place for those people over 5,000 years ago. And then around 4,000 years ago it was sealed up, so it didn't see the winter solstice sun did not penetrate up until 1699, when it was like opened up again. And even though there was ceremony going on there, there was a wooden henge there, and there were other sites nearby. But for some reason that people don't really understand, it could have been something like the earth would have some kind of natural thing that covered it up, or it could have been covered up purposefully. So nobody really knows. But there's something really symbolic about how the sun penetrates deep inside the womb. I'm using that word, not using it lightly, really, of the palace. About like how the sun returning will bring new life for the coming year. And so Newgrange has actually got a winter solstice online event tomorrow. I saw it on Facebook, so I think that's pretty cool, really. So really, you know, sending many blessings to that place, that we can potentially watch that from all over the world. And you know, there's places other sacred sites around the world where the midwinter sun aligns. And I think I just love how these ancient people had this knowledge about the movement of the sun and that alignment, because it feels really exact to be able to get that right. So I'm really grateful and for that kind of mystery that we obviously don't know about, but we're like able to experience it still. And then there's other places. So Stonehenge also has a winter solstice alignment from the central altar stone during sunset on winter solstice, where during the solstices, the summer and the winter solstice, is the only time, obviously, apart from this year, where people are actually allowed inside the stone. So I feel really grateful that there's still the acknowledgement um, from the from the community who are guardians of that site, that people really want to go there and celebrate in that way and really tune into those alignments on those days, that we can really feel that and celebrate. There's also a site called Maes Howe on Orkney that was built around 2800 BC, which is another burial ground chamber where the winter solstice sun shines into the mazes and chambers underneath the earth, which just feels so awesome to me to, like, acknowledge those ancient people up on Orkney Island, celebrating in that way. So yeah, I suppose I'm thinking about the importance of what this winter solstice means, really. I mean, we've got this incredible planetary alignment that's happening right now, so it feels like super potent to be able to celebrate and to be open to that potency, really. I mean, and also just really acknowledging that we're in this moment of turning. So, this time of storing our food, this time of going deep in, this time of dreaming, this time of sitting around our fires, telling stories, so that we are really in this inside deep moment. And then as we just can be still, even if we can just be still for a moment, and then allow that shift, that change in our bodies as it happens on the earth. So we're really aligning ourselves in that way. And I suppose for me personally, as I deepen my connection with this way of working with the turning of the year, with these particular festivals, I really notice how I'm paying attention to them. Like, I can feel the spin. I really felt this spin over the last few weeks, and I was like, oh yeah, we're spinning into the solstice. And I really felt it at Samhain as well, that kind of moment where the energy, I can feel it starting to shift and turn. And one of the things that I notice is my own spin. It's like, what's coming up for me that needs shifting, that needs this renewal from this festival, that needs to die and change, so I can really be ready for the spring. And I've noticed I can see there's a lot of like this shadow coming in up in our collective, and there is so much going on right now to be feeling really spun by. So I'm really encouraging everyone to take a moment tomorrow where we can go outside and be on the land. That's what I'm going to do, is go and find somewhere where I can sit and be still and really tune into this, like, in moment, and come inside and take a breath. And then I can release and, like, allow my body and allow my soul and allow my spirit to align with that moment of shifting, calling back the light. I'm also aware that, there's a lot of modern traditions from the winter solstice that, obviously there's a lot of plants growing right now. You know, mistletoe is a big, you see it everywhere, and there's a lot of tradition with mistletoe. There's a lot of, you know, it symbolically, it feels really strong and powerful. It can't be cultivated. You have to find it growing. It grows on the trunks of oaks, and it's really obvious right now. You see it. You see these silhouettes of trees with these big balls of mistletoe really beautifully growing, and in with their beautiful white, like plump fruits, which, so you've got this beautiful green, kind of bushy plant with these really lovely white plump fruits. Um, and that, like, actually, it was mistletoe that really kind of brought my interest into this festival when I was a teenager, when um, someone told me that apparently mistletoe was not allowed in churches for a very, very long time. And I just thought that's so interesting because it feels like such a Christmas plant. So why wasn't it allowed in churches? What was that about? You know, and there's something very fertile about mistletoe. There's apparently that it was used to ward off evil, and it's used in many modern Druid and pagan ceremonies to this day. So um, yeah, there's just a lot of interesting things about this plant that I feel really curious about. There's obviously like wreath making that goes on now. People put wreaths with holly and ivy and all kinds of beautiful things on their doors, and this traditionally was about protecting the home. And there's lots of other kind of interesting stories about what the reeds mean. You know, like if you found the holly that was spiky, it would mean something, and if you found the holly that was like smooth, it would mean something else. So and you know, one of the things that I'm really interested in, and I find myself doing in the summer, is making mead. So mead, mare, this ancient drink, honey wine, basically. You know, when the bees are giving, then it's made into mead, which feels like a very, very old drink. And I've been making it in this ceremonial way, so I can make it and I can have it as something I can offer. I can, when I make it, I leave offerings for the bees and for the water, try and collect well water, and make prayers over the mead so that it has this particular vibration, and then it becomes something that can be used in ceremony. And I feel very much that, and this is just my particular feeling, that mead is a drink for the winter solstice, because it would be ready right now. My mead that I made in the spring is ready to drink right now. So obviously I'm kind of tuning into that like period of time. So I'm also encouraging anybody who is a fan of mead like me to celebrate in that way, if that calls to you, to buy some mead and like honor our ancestors, because that was their drink. Mead is an ancient drink. It's really old, and it's a way to really feel back into our lineages and make offerings for those people that stand behind us and really support us, which I feel like we really need right now. And I feel like they've got us, you know, so offering that back, it can be really good. So I am almost finished with this information, with these stories. I'm really interested in how you are celebrating this year. If anyone's doing anything tomorrow, please can you write it in the chat? I'm really curious. I think it'd be lovely for us all to share something. If you're going out somewhere on the land, if there's a sacred site that you're visiting, if you're making an offering to someone particular, please share. And it would be lovely, obviously, to see if there's any different kinds of traditions. I mean, I'm just talking about particularly the traditions that come from Wales, and I'm really aware of this moment all over the world. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the shared intent of this day from so many traditions. And actually, that is very powerful when we collectively work together as a species. We can, all of us, come together to celebrate this time of calling back the light. And we can all come together in that way to really bless the earth and ask for a really good year next year, a really strong and courageous year, growing our food, being with our people, being with our land in a good way, which is all that we do as humans, is like walk in this turning of the year as we follow the sun, like our ancestors did. So I think I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Appreciate all your comments. Thank you, Katie and Simon. Yeah, and thank you everyone for being here. So yeah, really have a wonderful day tomorrow. Many, many blessings.